So good evening, everyone. My name is Martin Hamilton. I'm Director of Leeds Civic Trust, and I'm delighted to welcome everyone here this evening to this presentation and discussion about Temple Works, the future of an icon. I remember about 4 years ago, 3-4 years ago now, when we found out that the building was being put up for auction by the then owners, the Barnicle brothers, the newspaper headlines at the time were Temple Works up for sale by auction, no reserve. And so there was this concern that some bloke in a white van would turn up at the auction, bid £1 and end up with the building. And actually I went to view the mill and had a look round. There were one or two men with white vans having a look at the building, I have to say, when I went. And so it came as a bit of a surprise when at the 11th hour, the auction was pulled and we found out that CEG had bought the building through a private sale. And so since then, it's really been a case of waiting with bated breath to see what happens to this wonderful building. So I think we're going to be in for a treat this evening. We're going to hear something of the history of the building, the challenges that has been faced, but also where the British Library fits in, possibly as an occupier of Temple Works, but also looking more broadly at the work they do in Leeds. Of course, they've had a Leeds presence for many years. And then we'll round off with a discussion where we'll look at some of the wider issues as well around regeneration in this part of the city. Just to say very briefly in terms of housekeeping, we will have a couple of presentations this evening, and then at the end we'll have time for discussion and Q&A, at which point the chat function will be enabled, so you'll be able to put any questions direct to the panel and we'll try and answer as many of those as we can. But I'd like to just finish my brief introduction by introducing the participants this evening. So we have Jamie Andrews, who is on my left on the screen, and Jamie is Head of Culture and Learning at British Library. We then have David Hodgson, Head of Strategic Development at CEG, the owners of the building. We have Angela Barnicle, Chief Officer, Asset Management and Regeneration, Leeds City Council. And at the bottom of my screen, Rachel Withington, who is Portfolio Development Manager at British Library North. Now, Rachel had a few problems with her sound earlier on, so we'll see how that goes during the course of the evening, but fingers crossed indeed. But without further ado, I'd like to invite Jamie to kick off proceedings from the British Library perspective. Thank you, Jamie.
Brilliant. Well, no, thank you, Martin. Thank you, everyone at the Civic Trust. It's great to be here with you all. We were just discussing whether we prefer doing these things in person or online, and I think opinions were mixed, but it's absolutely the case. We know that by doing this online, we're reaching more people than we could normally. We're reaching people who may, for various reasons, not be able to make an in-person physical event. So I think that's something to celebrate. I hope perhaps we can also do it again later in the year in person as well, and that would be nice. Also, just to say, really great to be here with our friends and partners from CEG and the City Council, David and Angela. Again, we haven't seen you in person for coming up to a year now, but we have digitally been working very productively together collectively over the last year, and it's really nice to have the opportunity to say a little bit about that. So as Martin said, Rachel and I, sound permitting, and if not just I, we'll talk a bit about the British Library. We'll talk about our history in and around Leeds, and then share a few thoughts about perhaps our future in the city, where we may, through our plans for Temple Works, allow ourselves to be more present, more visible in the city in the future. So I'm going to share some slides now, which is always a nerve-wracking moment. Let's just see. So Martin, shout out if that's not visible, but I'm hoping that it is. And this is a good place to start. It looks like something out of the Matrix. It's one of our high volume, low oxygen, fully robotic automated storage buildings, which is situated not many miles from where I guess many of you are now in our Boston Spa site, our British Library site, just outside the village of Boston Spa. And what you can see there is the national newspaper collection, 60 million newspapers, more or less, 60 million newspapers going back 3 centuries. Every newspaper, local, regional, national, published in the UK, stretches over 33 kilometres. And I mean, it looks vast, it is vast, almost infinite. But even that building is just a tiny fraction of the collections that we preserve at our Boston Spa site in the city of Leeds. Far more than half of the national printed collection is preserved at Boston Spa in the city of Leeds. That's more than 100 million objects. And I think that's something that's really exciting and something to celebrate. But I'm conscious that some of you may not have visited the Boston Spa site. You may not know so much about the British Library. So we've got a short film that I am going to attempt to play. And again, Martin, shout out if you can't hear.
Ladies and gentlemen.
Ladies and gentlemen, it is a great pleasure to have this opportunity to address this very great and important gathering. I
am glad you are enjoying yourself.
There is an indefinable, mysterious power that pervades everything.
Wonderful discovery in an age of discovery. Let it keep up my foreign language. Well, can you hear? What are they going to play? What are they going to play? What are they going to play? Play. What are they going to play? Isn't it marvelous? Isn't it marvelous? Isn't it marvelous?
The music there, by the way, was by DJ Yoda. It was an original track created from from found audio recordings from the British Library Sound Archive, and that's another collection stored at Boston Spa. 5 million recordings dating back to the early dawn of recorded sound, 1877, Thomas Edison's experiments. Everything from 1877 through to today's digital downloads, part of that national audio collection, again, mostly stored at Boston Spa. So that's what we look like, or at least what we will look like again when people are able to be back on our sites. Where did we come from? Well, we were created in the early 1970s, which means that we're younger than many people think. We were created alongside, I guess, knowledge disruptor contemporaries like Microsoft or Apple. And if you see us in that context, I think it explains a lot about the British Library and its knowledge mission. Created by an Act of Parliament in 1972, and we opened this entity called the British Library opened in 1973. Now, in reality, of course, we weren't created by that Act of Parliament out of nothing, out of nowhere. It was really a coming together of many existing organisations, including the British Museum Library, but also other institutions, such as the National Central Library, which was created in the early 20th century to support adults who were not part of any formal education establishment, not part of any higher education establishment, but wanted to continue their learning. And the idea of that, of course, works very well today when we think about lifelong learning and adult education. So that became part of the British Library, as did something for the time revolutionary called the National Lending Library for Science and Technology, which had been created 10 years earlier in the early 1960s. As part of that white heat of technology, that early knowledge revolution. And the idea there was to distribute cutting edge technological and engineering and scientific research across the country through the nascent motorway system. And the site for that library was chosen. It was chosen to be Boston Spa, the Thorpe Arch trading estate, because that was roughly geographically in the centre of the country and really well connected to the motorway system, which, as I said, is how you distributed, how you shared knowledge across the country back then. And so when 10 years later, this entity called the British Library was created, the National Lending Library for Science and Technology became part of it. And so the Boston Spa campus also became part of what is now one British Library with a site in Boston Spa, proudly part of the City of Leeds, an LS23 postcode, and another site in London, handily at the end of the train line from Leeds. So when you get off the train from Leeds, you get out at King's Cross, you turn right, 3 minutes, you're at the British Library, a very different building, a late modernist architecture, opened 1998, and already Grade 1 listed. So we are the National Library of the UK. Those of you who are interested in these kind of things, we are an arm's length body that reports to our sponsor department in government, the Department of Digital Culture, Media and Sport. With a British Library, yes, but very much a library with an international vision and international partnerships and collections from all over the world, collections in around 400 languages, collections that date back 3,500 years, up to collections that come in just every day, blogs, tweets, newspapers that will have joined the collection this morning. And so while it's fascinating, it's an enormous number to say that we have 200 million physical items, let alone the 2 petabytes of digital content. Perhaps more crucially is that this is an organic collection that is constantly growing. And amongst those 200 million odd collections, let alone the digital collections, we've got what we might call our heritage collections, the treasures of the British Library, that tell stories that have shaped the world. Everything from Beatles' 7 inches, or even actually we have handwritten lyrics by Lennon and McCartney, through to the great works of English literature in draft, in manuscript, from Jane Eyre to Alice in Wonderland, Shakespeare first folios, or contemporary literary archives, including of Andrea Levy, who we celebrated at the Leeds Lit Fest just last week. There's faith texts from the great faiths of the world, books, manuscripts, newspapers, sound recordings, video recordings, stamps, you name it, we've probably got it. And that's great, but collections in and of themselves are insufficient unless they're brought to life, activated. Of course, the magical thing about the British Library is that anyone who needs to access almost any of our collections can do so at our site in Boston Spa, at our site in London, increasingly online. You don't need to be part of an education establishment, you just need to have a question that our collections can answer. So of course that is open to researchers of all descriptions and backgrounds, but of course we try to bring them to life as well through our events programming, festivals, concerts, you can see an image there, family programs, schools programs, and so on. And of course our exhibitions program, which has been growing over the last few years. Just to think of recent exhibitions, we've had everything from Harry Potter, A History of Magic, working with J.K. Rowling and her publisher Bloomsbury, through to a really important exhibition we did just a couple of years ago on the Windrush generation, which turned out to be such a prescient and important exhibition to help all of us understand not only our recent past, but our present as well. And then this exhibition, which is our current exhibition, currently closed, of course, but it will reopen soon, both in London and Leeds, and indeed across the country. It's called Unfinished Business, The Fight for Women's Rights, and it explores how today's feminist activists in the UK have their roots in a complex history of women's rights, which we, in the title, and with regret, suggest is still unfinished business. And I'm going to just briefly play a 20-second little trailer for this, just to give you an idea of an exhibition that I hope you'll be able to see when we move out of lockdown.
If I ever fall asleep now, would you wake me from a dream?
So our exhibitions inspire, but our collections inspire in all sorts of ways. They inspire entrepreneurs to innovate and grow new businesses. And we do this through our national network of business centres, our business and IP centre network. It's across the country, including in Leeds already. It's at the Central Library and increasingly across the city of Leeds. We've helped thousands of new businesses to be formed. We've created or helped create thousands of new jobs over the past few years, helped tens of thousands of entrepreneurs. And interestingly and importantly, we found that the people we helped to form new businesses are on average from more diverse backgrounds than you would normally find for people who start new businesses. So there's something about the inclusivity of the offer, not only our offer, but the offer of our partners, which seems like it's working. And then, of course, we are moving out of lockdown. We know we're confronting an acute economic situation, and the business centres are at the heart of helping businesses through that. Our Reset Restart programme is very much a post-COVID programme to help entrepreneurs to navigate through lockdown and to thrive and grow again. And then just thinking again about Boston Spa within the city of Leeds, as we've said, this is the Civic Trust, you're interested in built heritage. Just briefly to pause on the built heritage at Boston Spa, which is fascinating, and we could do another talk all about that. It was initially, many of you may know, a munitions factory, a Royal Ordnance Factory as they were called. In 1940, at the beginning of the Second World War, a number of new munitions factories were created as of course the government tried to ramp up production. And Boston Spa, the Thorpe Arch, what we now think of as the Thorpe Arch trading estate, was chosen as one of those sites, chosen because it was sufficiently close to a centre of population to provide a workforce, mostly women. And that, of course, was people coming especially from Leeds, from the train line that ran then, but equally sufficiently far away from a centre of population to hopefully avoid bombing raids. And that turned out to be the case. Opened in 1941 by King George VI, up to full capacity in 1942 with over 10,000 workers, mostly women, as we said, over 10,000 people working there. End of the Second World War, shut down, became a storage depot, recommissioned in the early 1950s for the Korean War. And then towards the end of the 1950s, the land, 200 acres, a vast plot of land, was sold off. Mostly became part of the industrial estate today in the prison, but 40 acres was retained by government. And when in 1960, as we said, the idea, this revolutionary idea of a hub, a centre for cutting edge science and technology research distribution was mooted. When that idea was mooted, the Boston Spa site was chosen for it, and then became part of the British Library when we were created in 1973. So our roots in the city of Leeds extend back to the founding of the British Library, and even, in fact, earlier. And today we still preserve collections at Boston Spa, almost 600 kilometres of physical collections, growing at a rate of 8 kilometres a year. Crucially as well, our cutting edge digital functions are there, our digital preservation, digitisation functions, digital storage and so on. And our on-demand, our document supply as well, which is very much the heir to that original vision of sharing knowledge and research through the motorway system. We now do that from Boston Spa, through the wires, through the internet. And I think we all knew that. We all knew that was an important service, but really that was brought home, I guess, this time last year at the beginning of the pandemic, when we managed to keep that service going, prioritising research requests from medical researchers and from health systems. We supplied research on epidemiology on coronaviruses to the NHS, to Public Health England, NICE, to pharmaceutical companies, to pharmaceutical regulators. We were able to keep that going for that so crucial flow of knowledge. We have a reading room in normal times where people can come on site to access the content. And crucially, for our presence in the city, we are a large employer. We're the largest DCMS employer outside of London, around 600 people, more than 500 roles based at Boston Spa. But, we are still, for the most part, in those original 1940s munitions factory buildings, which were built to be robust, but perhaps not fit for purpose for either people, whether that's our staff or our visitors, or for our collections nowadays. And so we are, with a significant injection of funds from central government, working to refresh and renew that site, to make it more welcoming, more open to visitors, to make it a better workspace for our people, and to house that growing national collection that I've mentioned. So I'm going to Oh, and as part of that refresh is an image there of how even the storage can become a visitor attraction itself. So I'm going to hand over to Rachel. Rachel, is your sound working now?
I hope so. Can you all hear me?
I can hear you, so I think that's good. I will mute
Brilliant.
myself and let you do the next few slides.
Thank you, Jamie. Always going to be a hard act to follow, talking about the breadth of the collections and what we do organisationally. But what I'm going to talk about over the next couple of slides is just a little bit about our engagement in Leeds, what we've done in advance of any kind of physical presence. Really started around 2 years ago, and we started to think a little bit more creatively about how we could build on that, what Jamie's just talked about at Boston Spa, but start to engage a little bit more publicly. So this slide here just shows one of our events. This is obviously a pre-lockdown event back in 2019. So this was Leeds Light Night. We had 2 large-scale immersive installations and were supported by local community groups on the theme of Buddhism. It was our exhibition on in London at the time. I think none of us could have predicted what was going to happen next in light of the impact of COVID-19. So all of our work post this massive event that we did, we had to pivot and try and deliver online, and wherever possible try to continue to engage in person, working with local partners. And this slide really just shows and builds on what Jamie was talking about there, about the breadth of what we do organisationally. So just to touch on a couple of the images here, so the top left is an image showing members of staff from Child Friendly Leeds, collecting our specially produced Christmas activity packs, which were then delivered to reach families who may not have digital access through community organisations, schools and food banks. In total, I think we've distributed over 4,000 of those already during lockdown. In the centre there, the contents of a first pack that was sent out to families taking part in a Reading with Your Child project that we launched. Again, this was in partnership with Child Friendly Leeds, and was working with families of care experienced children. Each week they receive a new pack and they have fun activities. I think this one was making a crown, where they take part in an online session just to encourage engagement with reading. And then along the bottom there, so some of our events as part of Leeds Digital Festival, our Unfinished Business Leeds Weekend. There's so much work going on. The breadth of what we do digitally and in person has been incredible, and I'm very, very proud of the team for being able to deliver, in light of the ongoing pandemic, a vast range of engagement over the last 12 months. Just to move on from the engagement that we're doing in light of the ongoing pandemic, and building on those ambitions for Boston Spa and our ever increasing programme, we started to think about what a vision for a long-term presence might be, and we really focused on around these 6 core themes on this slide. We're thinking about delivering a truly inclusive and internationally recognised visitor destination, building on our sustainability ambitions for Boston Spa to create a presence that supports regeneration and supports the local economy, connecting local business, whilst also ensuring that the service provision is forward-looking, but also integrated within whatever community that we become part of. So really quite a broad vision for what we want to do. And then it's really thinking, how do we translate that vision into a service proposition? And I think that's been the main focus of what we've been doing over the last 12 months alongside our programming. And this slide really is just to try and show the emerging thoughts of what we've been thinking about. So agnostic of any building, these are the kind of things we would want to do. But I think given the iconic nature of Temple Works, it's very, very hard to think about a service offer without the building shaping and informing what we might want to do. So the history of the building, which David will obviously detail much better than I ever could in a few moments, it was so innovative for its time, and we want to ensure that that innovation is reflected in whatever we might do. So as you might expect, we have a range of services we would want to provide. The first one there is a knowledge space, primarily a sort of flexible research space, but would enable collaboration, in-depth access to our physical collections, but also our digital collections that Jamie alluded to. Multifunctional exhibition and event space, which would enable showcase scale exhibitions, from showcasing of physical treasures to large scale digital exhibitions. Innovation space is the one that I think it doesn't say what it does on the tin. So what we're trying to do here is build on and complement our regional BIPC offer, supporting businesses through incubation, co-working space, makerspace, so that we can offer support to entrepreneurs at every single stage of their journey, but not only entrepreneurs, support innovation at any stage and from anyone. Public realm, as you can imagine, this building means so much to so many people, and we want it to be as open and inclusive to everyone as it can be. So there will be aspects of the building that are completely open for anyone to enjoy, and we want as much of the building to be open and available to everyone. There will obviously need to be space for staff, but primarily we're trying to make sure that, as I say, most of the building can be open for everyone to enjoy. And the last one there, learning and community space. So as I spoke about in the previous slides, a lot of our work is around engagement and outreach with schools, but obviously having spaces to enable safe access for learners of every age and community groups within the space is also very important to us. You just move on to the next slide, Jamie. Thank you. And I think it's very fitting for us to end with this slide before I hand over to David to just talk a little bit more about the extensive work that's gone into understanding the complexities of the building itself. So actually 12 months ago to the day, we were very fortunate as part of the Chancellor's budget announcement to receive commitment via a heritage fund as part of the West Yorkshire devolution deal to support the proposal and our exploration around a new home for the British Library, which, in addition to everything I've just talked about, has a significant focus on bringing that iconic building back into end use. So what I'll do now, I'll hand over to David, who will just talk about that work within the building. Thank you.
Thank you, Rachel and Jamie. Let me see if I can similarly make this work. There, can everybody see that? So yeah, thank you, Jamie and Rachel. As they've said, we've been working very closely with their team over the past couple of years since the purchase of the building in early January 18. And as Martin said, I similarly saw the reason that we purchased it is because I went on one of the open days and saw a kind of similar ilk of purchaser doing the rounds as well. And we thought to ourselves, this is such an iconic building for Leeds. We're obviously heavily present in Leeds through our involvement at Kirkstall Forge, and at that point we'd already acquired the site to the north at Globe Road, Water Lane. So we thought we can't let this building kind of fall into hands that might not really appreciate what they're getting themselves into. So I have a brief video here. We're just going to, despite me having a musical collection probably the same magnitude as the British Library, there's no DJ Yoda going on here. It's just unfortunately me droning over some drone footage. So I mean, what I wanted to show was the context of Temple within the city centre, and this idea that when we acquired it, we always knew and thought of this location as part of the city centre, but over the years it had been cut off by various mainly transport-based infrastructure, the canal there, the railway, of course, the river, and this place, this side of the station, with everybody leaving the station going to the north of the city had really grown, and this had become sort of kind of forgotten. So in the front there you see Tower Works, iconic 3 Italianate towers, and behind it Granary Wharf, and then Mustard Wharf that is now coming forward. This is the counting house. We know the counting house is the building at the front of Temple, and is actually structurally in the best condition. There in the foreground is the former sheep lift, and we'll come to that and explain a bit more about that. And then on the right there is Draper's Yard, or the 1953 building as was named, and in front of us is 20 Sweet Street. I'll hold on to something fixed at this moment as the drone does this, but it flies over that iconic roof that everybody knows, and then we come down into the building. And as you come into the building, you really gain a feel for the kind of scale of what we're talking about here. The quality of the natural light is unrivaled even in modern buildings. That's through these kind of 66 conical glass structures that sit on the roof. And then you can see these columns, obviously far too slender, and we'll come on to why that's causing us a problem. And then you can see there in the foreground some scaffolding around some of the yokes on the building, and then some extensive scaffolding towards the rear. What you can't see is the absolute bird's nest of scaffolding at the front of the building that's holding up the area that collapsed, and we'll come on to onto why that collapsed. So going back through the history, as I say, that's kind of a setting of the location. That gives you a real feel, I think, that sometimes you don't get on the ground as to how close this site and this building is to the station, which I think most people view as the heart of the city centre. And one of the reasons why you don't really get that feeling is the complicated route through. So you can walk out of the southern entrance of the train station, you can put yourself down into Granary Wharf, and it's still not kind of intuitive and a navigable system method about how you get through to this area. And I think part of the charm of the area is if you walk around Foundry, you're walking into little squares through kind of cut throughs and ginnels, and then out into another square, and that's going to be replicated through Tower Works with those towers and the development going on around it. And then we're trying to strike a real balance here on the wider area as to how you can get a real feel for it. It's going to be easy to get to Temple. However, at the same time, we want to kind of contain that and retain that element of surprise, and that makes this area so special. So going back through the Temple Works timeline there, you can see built in 1838 to 1841, designed actually by an engineer called James Combe, and we'll come on to why that was so important. And Joseph Bonamy, who's an Italian architect, I believe, that worked together on designing it. Joseph was brought in at the last minute because, surprise, surprise, and apologies, I know there's some engineers on this call. The engineer's design, whilst functional, didn't have that kind of flamboyance that John Marshall was seeking for his new flax mill. And so then it's gone through the history. It's the flax mill, and then it kind of moved into the 1930s when that iconic roof was lost in place for a flat roof, and then it was used for the war effort. And it was really there's an air raid shelter in the basement, and there was because it was this 80,000 square foot main room with the natural light. It was used during that time, and then it becomes to the case catalogue, which a lot of people around Leeds know it as, and that's when the 1953 building was built adjacent to it, and then it traded again to SJS Property Development, which was the Barclay brothers, and then we had the partial collapse in 2008, and then it's been kind of used for a myriad of different uses. There's been different options to purchase given over the site, and the kind of a few false dawns as to its coming back into use. So there you can see some of the historical images. There's been some debate about whether the roof was grassed and whether it had sheep on. We have discovered numerous bits of evidence that demonstrate that clearly was the case. And so there was grass on the roof, and now the sheep weren't up there all the time, obviously, but we'll come on to there was a hydraulic lift that was invented to get the sheep onto the roof to graze and look after that grass. And the reason they did that was to retain the moisture in the main building. So they wanted to get because that makes the flax much more easy to work with. What that meant, of course, is that you had engines that had to drive the machinery in the on the main floor. They were located down in the basement to keep out of that moisture. And that was one of the first instances of an engine down in the basement driving the machinery on the main floor, and then the environment effectively being controlled by what was on the roof. And that has been a reoccurring theme. We've kind of taken that and thought, well, how can we replace that or reflect that in the modern interpretation of it? But again, you can see the quality of the space and the quality of the natural lighting, just give rise to number of uses. I thought the other interesting fact about the history was John Marshall originally started out on his industrial buildings, where we've started out on Globe Road, Water Lane there to the north in 1796, 1791 with warehouses, and then gradually built it along Marshall Street. And that is, you know, that kind of reflection of starting near what would be obviously a very small city centre at that time and working its way southwards to Temple Mill is something that we've again is kind of being replicated in bringing the area back to life. And again, some iconic shots of the building, as I say, those conical glass structures that sit on the roof, and then the counting house there again with its Egyptian frontage, modelled on the Temple of Edfu in Egypt, and then Marshall Mill obviously sat alongside it, which has been back in use as a managed office space for some time. So we've talked a lot about the structural failure of this building, and I think it's well known that unfortunately, just after we acquired the site, we had to prevent access into the building because of major structural failure on the front of the building. But kind of more than that is really the nature of that failure gives rise to a situation whereby it's almost impossible to predict as and when it will go again. Now we've done our best to shore it up in the short term, but I'll come on to kind of what our plans are in the short and medium term going forward. But again, you can see the area of collapse there on the front. That's the frontage. On the left-hand side are the large windows fronting onto Marshall Street. The photo on the top left is actually the pavilion, which runs east-west behind the counting house and alongside the main room. And that's a two-storey building on there, which we're intending to bring back to life and put even a pavilion on top of that to then overlook the roof. So some examples really of kind of where the problem lies. On the top left, you see the roof structure. That's obviously a cross-section where the collapse happened, but you can see that archway structure. And that was the original structural solution to the building. And the water the intention was the water would land on the building. It would then run down those angles down to the bottom, and then run through the 84 steel columns that sit in the main room. They were then hollow, and then it would dissipate into the ground. In 1930, like I said, that kind of roof structure was lost, and it was done so they made a flat roof, and they did that by just basically loading the roof with, as you can see there, bricks and clinker and things like that into the gaps, and then layers of tarmac adam and concrete on top of that. That's led to a huge and significant increase in the weight loading on the roof. We are now kind of 3.5 million, £4 million into understanding this building through surveys. We know more about this building, I would suggest, than the guys that built it. And we've come to the conclusion it is pretty much down to that loading on the roof that's causing all the problems elsewhere. And those problems elsewhere, you can see the yokes that sit on top of those columns, and that's one on the right-hand side that's snapped. So that's the issue. We've got a lot of weight being applied onto the building. We've got cast iron brittle yokes and tie bar system that run around the building. The tie bars that you can see coming out of the four sides of that yoke then connect to another one, and then there's two tie bars run around the perimeter of the building. So you can imagine that all the kind of pressure on the building is then forcing it outwards, and these tie bars are holding it in at the perimeter. So this is a kind of an animation of how those yokes fit together. We believe that there was only one tie bar system in the original construction. However, it collapsed twice during construction. And one of the remedies was to introduce that second tie bar system that sits on the yokes to provide that greater level of stability. So that came slightly after the initial one, but you can see the kind of level of design and engineering that went into just one of those yokes. In 2008, there's a well-documented collapse. And a lot of people looking at, like us, as we first started looking at this, felt that the building collapsed inwards. And I think we spent a lot of time trying to understand how the building collapsed inwards when all the force is outwards. We found some old historical photographs of Marshall Street after the collapse. And I think the conclusion we've come to is what actually happened, as you can see on that model there, is one of the two perimeter tie bars gave way at the frontage. It was over a long-term kind of freeze thaw action, not that particular night. A lot of people was under the misapprehension that it was freezing cold that night. It wasn't. And what happened is then there was so much force in the building with the extra weight on the roof that this catapulted part of the facade across Marshall Street, and then the tie bar around the outside caught it and then pulled it back inwards. So that's why it looks like it collapsed inwards, but in actual fact the first projection was outwards, which is why if you go down there now, there's green nets on the outside of the building at the top of the columns, and that's if they're in the instance of a further collapse, that's to kind of that reflects the fact that the first act of force will be outwards. That's to capture those bits on the top of the column should that occur. And that's a bit more kind of understanding really of the 2008 collapse. So the lower yoke fractured. And it all happened obviously kind of simultaneously. There's a sudden release of this elastic tie, projectile masonry flung across Marshall Street, and then it all collapsed back inwards on itself. We've modelled that. We've got a much greater understanding now of why that happened. That's led to a lot of our conclusions. Because we haven't been to get into the building, we've had to do a lot of this work through drone footage, through robots. Arup and Christian Surveying have both worked together to build robots that go into the building. We've got hours and hours of drone footage on the outside of the building, and we've got sensors set up all around the building that monitor even the slightest of movement. And there's a statistic that says that what we've now got over a year's worth of data. This building is moving around 25 millimeters every 24 hours, on give or take on average, which it can only stomach for a limited period of time because of that brittle nature of the tie bar system. So it's doing it at the moment, and that's the biggest failing I think of this building. Is not the design, it's the materials that were made available to them at the time. So I've got a couple of slides here just to kind of flick through the main issues. As I say, one of the biggest thing is this core structural vulnerability given the 1930s additional weight on the roof, and you can see there again that cross section of where that weight's coming from. This then gives rise to a failing tie bar system. It's this brittle material. Again, there's a couple more examples there of where it's just sheared, and that's putting forces in all directions. And what's very difficult with this building is that should one tie bar go or one yoke go internally, the building can to a certain degree stomach that. What we can't predict is which way the force will then redirect itself. So that's hence we've got temporary structural works being designed. These columns, as I mentioned, are very narrow. They used to have water running through the middle of them, so there's obviously corrosion from the inside of these columns as well. And then all of this is giving rise to a lot of pressure on the perimeter walls. And the other big issue that we've got is we can see the yokes in the middle of the building. Where we can't see the yokes are where they're set into the perimeter walls. And there's, I'm not sure, 18, 20, I think, of these yokes kind of sat in the perimeter wall that we need to get access into the building to do, which we can't because of the stability issues. So that's the reason why we're having to kind of pick our way through the building very slowly. And then you've got a basement that's actually larger than the main room, runs through under the entire building and further than that. And that again is built on poor foundations, poor quality ground. So given all that information, we pulled together an option analysis of where we thought the best option was, and you can see there's various different solutions for dealing with the structural issues through an exoskeleton, through an internal skeleton, through buttressing, through a whole variety of things. And one thing we've got to always bear in mind is the grade 1 listed status of this building is in part reflective of that kind of quality of the main room and the light and the space, and we want to retain that wherever possible. So in all honesty, three or 4 years of work later, £3 or £4 million spent, and we've come to the conclusion that what Marshall did 200 years ago was probably right. But what he didn't have, as I say, was the right materials and the right construction techniques available to him at the time. So our solution is really a kind of whole tie bar replacement with modern modern materials that flex and move and reflect that kind of the nature of the building. Now, we can't get in to finally establish that until we've done a lot of what we're calling temporary stabilisation works, which we're hoping to start on site towards the end of this year. There's a year's worth of work there, and it's pretty much not much more than extensive scaffolding internally. However, it has to be done sequentially. You can't start in four corners and work your way to the middle. You have to work through bay by bay, which is why it'll take time. But we're hoping that having done that, we can recreate this recreate the space in the building. So on a wider aspect than that, the other reason for acquiring Temple is we've worked very closely with Leeds since acquisition to really see how we can make Temple not just the centrepiece for this area of the city centre, but how we can then take it further and really influence inclusive growth through the communities that have been cut off through the M621 delivery. So this kind of physical connections back, but also social and economic connections back into the city centre, and how we can use this building and obviously British Library's interest and hopeful future occupancy as a real catalyst to make that happen. So we've built up this is just one example of hundreds of exercises that we've done to build up a much greater understanding of the area, how people and traffic and community and everybody else use the area, how they could use the area going forward, what the constraints are, what the opportunities are. And then we've kind of developed a master plan off the back of that and about what that might look like. That's just really a massing exercise. That doesn't really reflect anything. But we've just kind of, we've got an opportunity here for around 3 to 4 million square foot of development that really puts the temple works as the centerpiece. And then we've started, as I said at the beginning, really looking at, do we create massive vistas down to Temple? Do we create a series of linked squares and public realm? Or probably the answer, do we do a mixture of all things? And how do we access and make this building much more accessible on all sides? So these are some of the ideas we've got put into CGIs. Again, these are just very in principle ideas. I think Leeds have always seen the space outside Temple as public realm, setting a high quality environment to really understand and appreciate that building. And then with development around it, creating new linkways, creating new ground floor uses, new activity, and really kind of, this being a new target for the wider area of the city. The CGI on the right hand side, there's the old schoolhouse, which believe it or not is actually older than the main Temple building itself. That sits, you can go down and see that off Bath Road at the moment, and Derwent Place that runs alongside it. And this was a real kind of community down here. Marshall did what Titus Salt did in Bradford, really, with the schoolhouse there, with terraced housing all around it, with the workers in the middle, with retail in the basement of Temple. There's a massive wild history of the place. If you sit in the courtyard at the moment around the back of Temple, the levels have been built up and the levels have been kind of messed around with to try and achieve access. There's actually quite a big level difference moving north-south throughout Temple. And in order to gain access into the main room, the levels have been built up at the back. So our thinking at the moment is that to reduce those levels back down, expose that entire frontage of the building and create, again, a new high quality public realm that will then lead in and link to Marshall Mill, lead further back to Beck Court, which is the building on fronting Water Lane, which we control, over a listed bridge, should I say, dating back to 1860, that goes across Holbeck, and then a link back through Tower Works, Granary Wharf, and back into the station. So a real clear, visible route through the area. And again, just kind of interestingly, one thing I hadn't really struck me until we bought the building was the lack of frontage, the lack of access that the building has. A lot of that was down to, we believe, industrial espionage at the time, and trying to kind of control things leaving the building and control people being able to get into the building and see into the building. So, trying to create new entrances and new ways of moving throughout the building without damaging or compromising that grade 1 status. And again, that really shows you how we're intending to use the levels internally to create an access point, and then up into the main room there on the left-hand side. And again, coming back to that courtyard, incredibly important public realm. that frontage down the back, which very few people can see, is not equally as impressive, but is impressive as anywhere else on the building. And that'll be a kind of a fantastic space. And then how can we use the basement? These are just ideas. How can we use the basement on the top right there to step down into creating some sort of auditorium? And then on the right hand side, you see the proposed pavilion that sits on top of that office building, and you can look out over the roof and really appreciate that. I thought I'd also put a little bit in because there's activity going on site. So Draper's Yard is formerly known as the 1953 building that hasn't come up. So the building that sits alongside Temple, we acquired that just over a year ago. I actually hoped that today I could announce some big plans for that, but just keep an eye out for a couple of weeks' time. We've got a quite big announcement coming about Draper's Yard, and that, I think, we're on site at the moment doing the soft strip internal demolition of that. We're going to keep the frame, we're going to keep the brickwork, we're going to refurbish the building and bring it forward as a really high quality grade A space in Leeds. It's unique. It offers a nearly 40,000 square foot floor plate, which gives us the opportunity to put space out on the roof as well. And that has the same issues as Temple, in that there's a lot of roof lights on the that allow light into the first floor, but not so much into the ground floor. So we're going to try and punch through into the into the ground floor and create a high quality space down there as well. And as I say, we've got some big plans for that. As of about 6 weeks ago, we also acquired 20 Sweet Street, which sits behind Draper's Yard and has a mural by Thubron on there, and we're talking to various organisations now about how we can retain that. But then that gives us the opportunity then to build out backwards, and as I say, really that's another boundary and of the building itself that we now control, which leads to a more accessible and an easier long-term solution to sorting out the building itself. So that's where I'll stop. I think I'm going to hand back to Martin, I believe, to look at a Q&A session.
Well, thank you very much, David. And yeah, if everyone wants to turn the cameras on and unmute, that would be great. Wow, well, that was a really impressive and inspiring 40 minutes or so, looking at the work of the British Library across the country, but particularly in Leeds, and the opportunities for further work and further activities, and then focusing on Temple Works in particular, the challenges, which are fascinating, aren't they? The engineering challenges, but also the potential of this building as part of a wider regeneration. So maybe I could start with Angela, because I thought it might be useful just to have a slightly wider context for the South Bank. So Angela, I wonder if you could just say a little bit about why the council is clearly putting a lot of effort and time into thinking about what the South Bank could be. Why is it so important, do you think, Angela?
Thanks, Martin, and good evening, everybody. The South Bank is hugely important for the city for lots of reasons. First of all, Leeds is very, very walkable. I think it's got this unique opportunity of being a very human scale, and I think David's image that he showed, which had that walking radius that puts Temple Mill in terms of 5 minutes from the station. If we only ever looked towards the North Bank, it's clear to see the amount of development that has come through. But actually, if we start looking towards the South Bank, we get this incredible opportunity, not just for further development opportunities and to repurpose that part of the city, but really to weave back in our neighbourhoods in the city of Hunslet, of Beeston, and wider back into the city centre. And we used to call the South Bank the largest regeneration site in Europe, which actually I think really underplays the huge amount of work that's already come forward. It's already a collection of neighbourhoods, and it's already home to 10,000 workers. It has about 5,000 students that come through that space, and about 8,000 people who already live there. So for us at the City Council, it was always about making sure that the city centre wasn't just, you know, it wasn't just a semicircle. It was about checking it in all round and making sure it was inclusive for all the city centre. And there are some great opportunities that are coming forward this year. Obviously, we've got the city park that's about to go on site. I mean, Leeds is 2/3 rural, but if you come into the city centre, it doesn't feel like that. So I think the addition of a 3.5 hectare park right in the heart of the city centre gives a real opportunity to make the city centre continue to have that human scale. Right through to the new bridges that we've put in on stream to make sure that, not literally over the stream, but over the river, to connect that north and south bank. And David's absolutely right that if you come out of the southern exit of the train station and 27% of people who use the city station do, and that pre-pandemic was 34 million people per annum. So if you think about, you know, the reasons why the British Library chose Boston Spa being the geographic heart of the country, the train station is at the geographic heart of, you know, a very low carbon infrastructure system. And it's not very legible at the minute if you come out of the southern exit. And actually our city really needs to look south as much as it's looked north.
There's this issue, Angela, of the area being there's a danger, isn't there, with the with the physical infrastructure, the railway lines, the motorways, that this could become a bit of an island. That, you know, the reaching out to Beeston and other parts of South Leeds is a problem. How do you think we get over that issue? Because I mean, there are some physical barriers, there's no doubt about it.
Absolutely, there are. And I think if you stand on the edge of Minerva Road and look into the city centre, it's almost within touching distance, but my goodness, you can't walk it. And the whole purpose of having an occupier of the magnitude of the British Library is not, it's about signposting the way into the city centre. And we will have to improve walking routes and cycling routes and making it much more human. And the only way we can do that is to make sure that these routes are penetrable, but beyond that, there is a destination that people want to walk to. And I think someone like the British Library, who actually the whole purpose of you reaching into the city centre is about giving greater access to what is, you know, it's almost a modern time capsule, isn't it? And if knowledge is power, then the power of the British Library being based right in the south bank of the city centre at the geographical heart of the country is the most powerful thing that we can give our residents.
Rachel, could I ask you to say a bit more about some of the things you presented in your slides, in particular this idea of reaching out to the community? You know, how important is that to the British Library, and how do you want to sort of extend that activity, and how could this building, using it as a hub, if you like, play a part in that?
Yeah, I think it's critical to anything we do. Like I say, all of our service delivery is aimed at public engagement. So delivering something that is not providing what the community around it needs, for us, wouldn't be a success. So I think a lot of the work that we're doing already, without having a building, is about getting out there what we already do, but also finding out what people want from us and how that can shape and influence what we might want to do in the future. So I talked a little bit about our emerging plan and our emerging vision, but like I say, that's just an emerging plan and an emerging vision, very much to be shaped and influenced by the way that we interact in the communities that we engage with in the local area.
So we're getting a lot. Thanks for Rachel. Thanks for that. We're getting lots of questions through the chat, so do keep those coming. We'll try and pick up on as many as we can, and perhaps I could just turn to Dave Hodgson and just ask you. I think there's one sort of theme that's emerging from, well, a couple of themes emerging from the chat. One is timescales. And you're the owner of the building, so or not you personally, but your company, although you possibly could have been the owner of the building given that it was being sold for £1. Could you give us a bit of an idea of sort of timescales, and in particular this issue of the structural issues, and, you know, can you move any quicker? Is the pace that you're moving at sort of the quickest? Is there a danger of further collapse? This seems to be a concern being expressed by one or two people.
Okay, that's one of the questions. One thing I will clarify is when I said it moves 25 mil every 24 hours, it's not continually moving in that direction, it moves around. So you know, and it has been doing that for obviously for decades. So yeah, in terms of timescale, I thought I'd dodge that, to be honest, but in terms of timescale, what we're working to at the moment, Rachel mentioned this devolution grant money that was allocated against the building. Basically, the works that we have to do to the building come in two stages. Temporary stabilisation, which I say is pretty much extensive scaffolding, buttressing, putting the building back so we can get access to it. That's nothing to do with the completed, well, part of it will be to do with the completed work, but it's to gain access. And at the moment, we just can't gain safe access. That'll take about 12 months. And we're looking at starting that hopefully towards the, say, end of September, October time, hopefully of this year. I don't want to commit to timescales because obviously it's very difficult to do so. That'll take 12 months. Then following that, we'll probably have around 6 months of actually carrying out surveys that we can't do at the moment, more design, maybe a bit longer, working out how, I mean, just on the face of it, you know, it's going to be a huge construction contract for somebody, but does a contractor that normally goes into Leeds city centre and builds a shiny office building in kind of modern materials want to tackle something like this? So we've got to find a contractor that's and we have been having very positive discussions with contractors already. So a lot of the procurement and all of that side of it is already ongoing. So we're confident that can be overcome. And then I think the main works itself will take around 3 years to do. And the main driver behind that, as I mentioned in the presentation, isn't that we can start in all directions and it's just a classic refurbishment project. With the load shifting all over the place, and if one thing goes, as I said in my presentation, in one location, we don't know where that load's going to disappear, then we've got to stabilize the building to that level, and then again work through it methodically and step by step. So that's the kind of rough timescale that we're working to at the moment. We've been working very positively with Leeds as well on their land that surrounds it. And we also want to bring forward the kind of the development that goes on around the building as well, because one thing we're all conscious of is we don't want to do this work to Temple and then find it's in the same environment that it's in at the moment. So we're working to bring that development forward sooner rather than later, and I'm hoping that bringing forward Draper's Yard in the very short term is evidence that we're doing that, and it also bookends the two schemes. So we're looking at starting on site on Globe Road in April, or restarting on site, should I say, in April. Draper's Yard hopefully later on this year, and then this kind of just squeezes Temple into the middle of a much larger development site. So they're the kind of timescales that we're working to.
Thanks, David. Jamie, there's a couple of comments here that I'd like to put to you, if I may, that have come through. So one question stroke comment is the regional dimension. So clearly British Library has a Leeds presence and has had one for some considerable time. The intention here is to increase that presence, but clearly people are saying that shouldn't be at the expense of reaching out to the other parts of West Yorkshire, for example. So how do you see Leeds as a hub, but actually as a northern hub, not just as a place in Leeds?
Absolutely. There's a number of ways of looking at that. Firstly, this is, I mean, we talked about the connectivity. We expect that people will want to travel to this iconic site, and the services that we'll be offering will absolutely be targeted at and engaging with people from across the wider region and thinking about the presence in the north. But this isn't the only thing we're doing. This is what, you know, we're talking around Temple Works tonight, but there's a huge amount that we do to engage across the UK. Alongside this, as part of what we are as the National Library. We're not the London Library or the Leeds Library, we're the National Library of the UK. Not least through our partnership with public libraries. Our Living Knowledge Network extends out throughout more than 30 public libraries, and indeed through their networks as well. And there's all sorts of shared cultural programming, learning programming and knowledge exchange that goes on there. There's our digital work. I mean, we've gone more digital during lockdown, but we've realised that through that, just like this event, we're reaching people who wouldn't otherwise be able to make a physical event. We've done that throughout our digital programming in the last year, and we're absolutely not going to leave that behind either. So I think seeing this as a real iconic statement in Leeds, in the north, but seeing it alongside the whole of the British Library offer is probably the way to do that. And could I just pick up a question, because they're flashing in so fast, it's impossible to keep up with, but there was someone a few questions ago, and I didn't catch your name, so apologies, who said that they were an artist who worked at Temple a few years ago. And I think there's a really good point that Angela made, that people live in the area, people have lived in the area and have a relationship with this building that goes back many years. The building's a receptacle of stories, and we want to know more about those stories. But we've talked a lot as well about being really conscious that creative people have done immensely creative things in the building in the recent past, and we'd love to reach out and engage with you. And having missed the actual question, but I think, Martin, perhaps we can share our contact details afterwards, because we'd love to hear from you, not just if you've done creative practice there, but your relationship, your stories to the building. That's what we're building on, and absolutely love to work with you.
Well, that's really good to hear, and we can certainly pass on that message. I suppose another theme is around, inclusivity versus exclusivity, and this might be this I guess could be Angela, it could be David, it could be any of you actually to sort of address this one. The concern that this part of Holbeck isn't just an area for people with money, that actually there are different options, that it will be an area, and that it will become an area that all sorts of people will feel comfortable accessing and will be able to financially access. Angela, do you have a sense of what sort of community we're trying to create here?
I think it's really interesting how you answered that, where it could be any of us. In fact, it should be all of us thinking about inclusivity and versus exclusivity. I'm a great believer in that it's not necessarily a building that's a destination, it's what happens with inside it. So actually what we've got to get right is a couple of things. One, this is a destination that everybody can come to, and I think having someone like the British Library really creates a statement about their intention. And Rachel and Jamie have been doing some fantastic outreach work. Certainly over the last 3 years, I've had the privilege of working alongside them, that has spanned right through from working in central libraries, right through to our schools, right through to having quite a significant presence for a short time in Kirkgate Market. It's also then about physical access. And I think we've already touched on that. And I think one of your comments was about the bridge that could actually span the live railway network. And that is certainly a huge aspiration that's in the framework, which we are trying to think about how we can finance and work with partners to do it. The third thing is people feel like they have a right to come through to these jobs. So it's about that jobs connection and skills pathway. And I think with the work that we're doing through Digital Leeds and our libraries, and certainly over the last 12 months, where we've had this great adoption and move to digital access, but we only saw when the schools went remote, how many people do not have the software or the hardware to access. So I think there's a role for all of us, and it's been absolutely marvellous. And I know that you've got one of the Morley councillors on here about the work that people have been doing about repurposing hardware. And I think that point about inclusivity, not just being a role for a local authority, it's a role for everyone as a citizen, as an employer, has to really come through.
Angela, I mean, there's a comment here I could read out, and this is one for CEG, I guess. And can CEG make a commitment to supporting small and local businesses in Leeds? Thinking about the kind of shops, services, entertainment that appear as a result of larger developments. Not just the large brands, but smaller businesses. What sort of vision do you have for Temple as a whole, David?
Well, in answer to that question, I think one of the things that sets CEG apart from perhaps other developers is that we're also investors. We have a sizable investment portfolio around the country, so we're not in the game of building these and then kind of selling them for the maximum amount of money into the open market. We want to curate these spaces and really look after them. And throughout our portfolio, we have a mixture. So take one building, for instance, one building at Kirkstall Forge, which probably epitomises our portfolio. We've got a large-scale tenant in there, Zenith, local company, built up by a local entrepreneur who are in a 60,000 square foot. The food and beverage unit on there, we know that that idea that you put a coster in these sort of buildings and expect everybody in the building, everything in the office to use it, is a kind of outdated model. So we then fitted out that space. We then put an operator in there that used to run a deli on Street Lane, you know, and that's, we understand where those changes are going. And then we've got a floor and a half in there of our Let Ready product, which is you can literally rent a handful of desks to 20, 30 desks. And we've got a structure whereby we can fit those out. We can put pens on the desk if you want to. You know, it just depends how far you go. So absolute commitment to creating these sort of environments, because we know that a lot of, if you fall into the trap of making what you might think of an identikit development, then it closes down at 5:30, 6 o'clock in the evening, and there's nothing there Saturday and Sunday. It's not an attractive place to work. People's work patterns are changing as a result of, I think, that change is accelerating as a result of the last 12 months or so. And so we accept and acknowledge that, and we want to reflect that in the product that we bring forward. So absolutely, we can make a commitment to kind of keeping that vitality and the energy around the place.
Could I ask a question about sort of, again, looking outwards, looking beyond Leeds? Someone's asked about tourism and whether tourism is part of what you know British Library can bring, if you like, to the city with this initiative, or more generally with some of your activities. And I know you mentioned in the presentation one of the sort of themes was, you know, an international dimension. So could you say maybe say a little bit about that?
Yeah, I mean, I think we can bring visitors from the rest of the UK and internationally. I mean, Temple, the building, will bring people. It's the source of local pride, of city pride, but it's the building of national and really international significance. So absolutely. I mean, obviously strange times at the moment, but in general, we know from the work we do already that we get visitors from all over the world. We've engaged with, I think in the last year, but certainly before lockdown, we engaged with every single UN registered country in some way. So absolutely, our networks and our visitors and our users are from all over the world, and that would be part of the vision for Temple. And I guess it's just a balance that we have a local base, we have a national base, and we have an international base, and those coexist and enrich each other brilliantly. But we wouldn't want to focus only on one or other of those, because we think we can be meaningful and inclusive to local people while also being a draw for people from much further. And it's just getting those in balance. But that's what we do. That's what we do anyway. And our big events, festivals, exhibitions do we know draw people.
Just a couple of quickies, Jamie. Would you use the whole building? Is the idea is that you would take the whole building?
It's a big building, but we're a big organisation. We've got big plans. I think we're still with David and colleagues thinking about that, but certainly there's potential for the British Library to be able to fill all that space. But a lot of work needed to understand quite how that will happen.
And I mean, clearly this is, we're talking about this as a potential. We're not talking about this as a done deal. I mean, could you just say a little bit about, you know, well, I suppose, you know, how far down the track are we in getting to the point where it becomes a done deal, and how can people help? Maybe people listening today, how can they help in supporting these aspirations?
Yeah, and I mean, it's again they're flicking past too quickly to fully take in, but sure. I'm picking up a huge amount of enthusiasm in the questions, which in itself is really important, because as much as anything, what we're doing today is testing an idea that we've been talking about for the last year, but which we haven't had the opportunity as much to test with the broader public. So it's great to feel that enthusiasm. The enthusiasm is real from all of us. I think it's worth saying it's a really complicated building and a complicated project, and that means that it will take time. The first step is to really understand all the costs, all the work that needs to be done, and that's exactly what we're starting to do now. And it's impossible to commit until we get that full picture. So I think that all we can say is that the work is starting on the building now to understand it better, to safeguard it, and as we understand more, then we'll be able to get towards greater certainty. But we're enthusiastic, and we're We had that really strong signal of support from central government last year, and I think we should be honest that there is going to be a funding, or there is at this stage a funding gap, and so we will need to connect with people who may be able to help us there, or who may be able to have ideas of people who will help support us, because we will need that broader network of support to build on the initial injection from the government.
Thank you for that, Jamie. So I think there's probably an opportunity at some point, later this year or next year. There might be a moment in time when we can maybe reconvene and look at where we're at with this whole initiative. We're coming towards the end of our time, so maybe just go around the panel one last time and ask this sort of question. So the Temple Works and the immediate environment around it, what will it be like in 5 years' time or 10 years' time? What do you hope the experience would be if someone listening in on this video presentation today was to wander down? Maybe start with David.
Oh, I knew you'd do that. What do we envisage there? How we envisage it, and how any sort of large-scale regeneration scheme works best is to have almost 24/7 vibrancy, activity, fully inclusive, as I say, different types of uses, different types of user, office users in at the weekend, that kind of thing. Is that when you do that by offering a huge range of different types of space and different types of industry, if we can bring forward Draper's Yard in the way that we want, that'll be a very long way down that track. That will really epitomize what we're trying to achieve down here in terms of kind of wide use and an exciting industry that is at the forefront of the economy at the moment. So we want to create something that reflects the heritage, reflects the history of the area and the local community, but also is forward looking as well, and really kind of helps put Leeds on the international map.
Rachel, what would you say to that?
I guess for me, it's mainly about it truly being an area that's for everyone. So going down there being an energy about the building, but also around the building and the spaces between the buildings, but that you could go there and see anybody there doing anything. And I think that would be the best use of that building, is that people can use it for what they feel that it should be used for. Thank you.
Jamie?
Yeah, I was going to say energizing and innovative. That slide I showed of people, 500-600 people at a concert at the British Library, that feels, I feel really nostalgic for that. I mean, we're all stuck in our bedrooms, but the joy of just being with people of all backgrounds in an inspiring, iconic space just creates its own energy. So it will be energizing and innovative. I think we talked about it, but just this sense that, this was an innovative building of its time in the 1830s, 1840s. It was at the heart of the first industrial revolution. We're now in the fourth of the knowledge industrial revolution, and we feel that we can bring meaning to this building for today, absolutely reflecting and honouring that original innovation.
Thank you, Jamie. Joanna Mawson said the Pompidou Centre is a good example of that kind of inclusivity. It's also an interesting structure, isn't it? Maybe you could take inspiration from the Pompidou Centre in terms of the maybe that's a further option to shore up the building, having the infrastructure on the outside rather than inside. I'm not sure that would quite work with a realistic building.
Is that official Civic Trust policy? Is that
no. I'm just reading what people are saying. I'm not endorsed. Nothing I say is endorsed by the Civic Trust. Angela, finally from you then. So from a council perspective, what do you feel is sort of 5 years, 10 years hence? What would it be like when you walk down there? What would you like to see?
So I'd probably start with that momentum's a really powerful thing, and we've got a huge amount of momentum here now. I think with the city centre has changed remarkably in the last 12 months. And whilst I'm really sorry that you will go in and there'll still be some disruption, we've worked really hard to make sure the change we were putting in to cope with social distancing actually was permanent. So the comment that Rachel that made, and obviously we had GEL who were involved in the South Bank framework. The spaces between buildings are more important than the building themselves. And it's already changing, and we've got 2023 that we've not even mentioned, our International Year of Culture, which is again going to push us on even further. And then I think it won't be 5 years away. And I say that as someone who's probably worked around here for 20 years without seeing that huge amount of activity. But I think we're at that iceberg moment where we're now really starting to break through, and that change will come really rapidly. And I think what I would really like to see is that this way would create a really good footfall where people will walk to a Champions League final at Ellen Road and beyond, and they won't think twice about what's the routes they're taking. So I think really having that pedestrian route into the city centre from Holbeck and Beeston will be the marker of this development.
Angela, that's a great way to finish the evening. A really great image to have in our minds as we go and make our cocoa, or maybe it's a bit early for cocoa yet, but as we go and digest what has been a fascinating hour and a half. Some really inspirational presentations and some real food for thought in terms of what this part of Leeds might be like in the future. So I'd just like to thank everyone on the panel for joining us this evening. Thank you for giving up your time to talk about this really interesting and inspiring topic. And thank you all for listening in this evening. As some of you will know, we always record these events, and we'll be working to convert it into a form that we can broadcast on YouTube, so you'll be able to watch at your leisure later on. There are 1 or 2 other events coming up shortly, which we'll let you know about in the follow-up email. But really just remains for me to thank you all again, and I hope you all have a very good evening. So good evening. Thank you.